The private jet hummed quietly through the night sky, 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. Kian Patel dozed fitfully in his leather seat, exhaustion from back-to-back board meetings finally catching up with him. His laptop screen glowed softly in the dim cabin, displaying quarterly reports he'd been reviewing before sleep took over. A sharp chime pierced the silence. Kian's eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the darkness. An email notification blinked insistently on his screen. He reached forward, intending to swipe it away, when the preview line made his blood run cold. Breaking tech billionaire's surrogate scandal. Anonymous source reveals hidden past. His fingers hesitated over the trackpad. Something twisted in his gut. That primal instinct that warns you when your world is about to shift. He clicked. The article loaded slowly, each second stretching like an eternity. When the text finally appeared, Kian felt his hands begin to tremble. The words blurred together, but certain phrases jumped out like accusations. "No," he whispered, his voice lost in the engine's drone. "This can't be." Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in Oakland, Nina Bosco hummed softly while folding tiny onesies in her modest apartment. The baby, Kian's daughter, moved gently inside her, responding to her contentment. She had no idea that across the country, the man she'd grown to care for was reading words that could destroy everything they'd built together. Nina placed a protective hand over her belly, smiling at the movement within. In just a few weeks, she would give birth to this precious life. The nursery was ready, painted in soft yellows and greys. Everything was perfect. She didn't know that perfection was about to shatter. In the next few hours, one man would make a choice that would either destroy 2 lives or create a miracle. Welcome, dear friends, to Mr. Roman's Story Vault. Tonight, we're not just telling a story, we're exploring the very heart of what makes us human. Because sometimes, the most profound moments in our lives come disguised as our darkest hours. Sometimes the person who seems to have betrayed us is actually the one who needs us most. This is a story about forgiveness, not the easy kind we offer for small mistakes, but the soul-deep forgiveness that transforms lives. It's about redemption, about how our worst moments don't have to define our future. And yes, it's about unexpected love, the kind that arrives when we least expect it, from the last person we'd ever imagine. If you've ever wondered whether someone deserves a second chance, if you've ever questioned whether secrets can coexist with love, if your heart still believes that broken trust can be rebuilt stronger than before, then you're in the right place. Before we continue, I have a small request. If stories that touch the soul and leave you with something meaningful matter to you, please take a moment to tap that subscribe button below. And don't forget to ring the notification bell. It tells me to keep bringing you stories like this one, stories that remind us why compassion matters, why love endures, and why every person deserves the chance to rewrite their ending. Your support means the world to me, and it helps ensure these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let me ask you something. What would you do if you discovered the person you trusted most had been hiding something that could change everything? Would you walk away? Or would you stay and fight for what you'd built together? Hold that thought. He was a billionaire CEO who built an empire with his brilliance and iron will. Kian Patel transformed Zenith Tech from a startup in his garage to a global AI powerhouse worth billions. His products changed how we interact with technology, making him one of the wealthiest men in Silicon Valley. Yet for all his wealth and power, Kian lived in silence, carrying a loneliness no one could see. He had everything money could buy, except the one thing his heart truly wanted, a family to call his own. His vast penthouse echoed with emptiness each night. His achievements felt hollow without someone to share them with. Then there was Nina Bosco, an artist with a generous spirit and gentle hands. She was chosen to be his surrogate, an arrangement that should have been simple, professional, and nothing more. A contract, a pregnancy, a child. No complications, no emotions, no shared future. Nina had her reasons for becoming a surrogate. Noble reasons, she believed. A chance to give someone else the gift of parenthood while helping secure her own future. But beneath her warm smile and kind eyes, lay a truth she'd buried years ago, a choice she'd made when she was young and afraid, a secret she never intended to reveal. The day Kian uncovered the shocking truth about Nina's past, everything changed. What he did next would not only rewrite her life but his own forever. This is their story. But first, let me take you back to where it all began, to a morning in San Francisco, when a successful man finally admitted to himself that success alone wasn't enough, and to an afternoon in Oakland when a woman decided to give the ultimate gift, never imagining how completely it would transform her world. Kian Patel had everything, except the one thing money couldn't buy. The digital alarm chimed softly at 5 a.m., not that Kian needed it. He was already awake, had been for an hour, staring at the ceiling 40 floors above San Francisco. Sleep rarely came easily to him anymore. There was always another problem to solve, another acquisition to consider, another innovation to pursue. He rose mechanically, bare feet touching the heated marble floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows automatically adjusted their tint as dawn broke over the bay, casting golden light across his minimalist bedroom. 3,000 square feet of premium real estate designed by a world-renowned architect, filled with museum-quality art, and profoundly empty. In the ensuite bathroom, Kian examined himself in the mirror. 38 years old, a few silver strands now appeared at his temples, contrasting against his otherwise jet-black hair. His mother would say they made him look distinguished. His fitness trainer would attribute them to stress. Both would be right. He completed his morning routine with practiced efficiency. A cold shower to shock his system. A wake. A precisely measured protein shake. A brief meditation session overlooking the bay. The city below was just beginning to stir, headlights forming rivers of light in the pre-dawn darkness. Messages, he commanded, and his smart home system responded immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Patel. You have 17 new emails marked urgent, 3 voicemails, and a reminder about today's board meeting at 10 a.m. Would you like me to summarize the emails?" "Go ahead." Kian sipped his coffee, black, no sugar, as he listened to the AI's report. Global markets, prototype failures in the Tokyo lab, a potential security vulnerability in their latest release. Problems that would send most CEOs into a panic, but for Kian, just Tuesday. By 6:15 a.m., he was in his home office, video conferencing with teams in Singapore. By 7:30, he'd resolved 2 crises that would have taken most executives a week. By 8:45, he was in the back of his Tesla, scrolling through the quarterly projections as his driver navigated morning traffic. The Zenith Tech headquarters stood 42 stories high, a gleaming tower of glass and sustainable materials. The lobby fell silent as Kian entered, not from fear, but from a genuine respect that he'd worked hard to earn. He nodded at the security team, greeted the receptionists by name, and made his way to the private elevator. "Morning, Mr. Patel," his executive assistant said, falling into step beside him with practiced ease. "Your coffee is on your desk. The R&D team sent up the new prototype for your review, and Mr. Jin is waiting in your office." Kian paused. "Dante's here. He wasn't scheduled until this afternoon. He said it was important." The assistant's expression revealed nothing, but Kian knew his oldest friend wouldn't be waiting in his office at 9 a.m. without good reason. The executive floor was quiet, purposefully isolated from the creative chaos of the departments below. Kian's office occupied the northeast corner, offering panoramic views of the bay. As the door slid open, Dante Jin rose from the leather couch, a broad smile on his face. "The great Kian Patel, right on schedule," Dante said, embracing him briefly. They'd been roommates at MIT, founded Zenith Tech together in Kian's garage, and weathered every corporate storm side by side. While Kian had remained single, focused on building their empire, Dante had married his college sweetheart 5 years ago. "What's so urgent that you're in my office before the markets open?" Kian asked, settling behind his desk. Dante's smile widened as he slid his phone across the desk. On the screen was a photo of a tiny baby wrapped in a blue blanket, eyes squeezed shut, face peaceful in sleep. "Meet David Jin, 7 pounds 4 ounces, born at 3:17 this morning." Kian's professional mask slipped for a moment, genuine joy breaking through. "Dante, congratulations. I thought May wasn't due for another 2 weeks." Apparently little David had his own schedule. Dante couldn't stop grinning. "May's resting now. I just came from the hospital to grab some things for her. And you stopped here? Go back to your family." "I will. But I wanted you to be the first to know." Dante reclaimed his phone, looking at the baby picture with undisguised adoration. "Also, we want you to be his godfather." Kian felt something catch in his throat. "I'd be honored," he said quietly. "Good, because we already put it on the birth certificate." Dante laughed, then grew serious. "You know, everything changed the moment I held him. Everything. The company, the money, the stress, it all fell away. Nothing has ever felt so important." Kian nodded, unsure what to say. "Speaking of which," Dante continued, "when are you going to slow down? Find someone? Start a family of your own?" The familiar question landed like a weight. Kian glanced at his calendar. Meetings stacked back to back until 9 p.m., just like tomorrow and the day after. "That's a luxury I can't afford right now," he replied, the words practiced and hollow. Dante's expression shifted. "That's the third time you've given me that exact response this year." Word for word. "Because it's true." "No, it's not." Dante leaned forward. "You're worth billions, Kian. You've built something remarkable, but you work like you're still that hungry kid from Mumbai with something to prove." "There's always more to prove," Kian said quietly. "To whom?" Dante challenged. "Your father's been gone for 10 years. Your mother just wants you to be happy, and the board would follow you into hell if you asked them to." He sighed. "Look at yourself. When's the last time you took a vacation, had dinner with someone who wasn't a business contact, spent a weekend not checking your email?" Kian remained silent, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Dante stood, preparing to leave. "Just think about it. Life moves quickly. David will be walking before I know it. I don't want you to wake up at 60 and realize you built an empire with no one to share it with." After Dante left, Kian sat motionless, staring at the view without seeing it. The board meeting came and went. He approved designs, settled disputes between department heads, and reviewed the latest marketing campaign. But his mind kept returning to Dante's words and the image of his friend holding his newborn son. That evening, Kian dismissed his driver and walked home through the cooling city. The sidewalks were crowded with people rushing to meet friends, hurrying home, to families, living lives that suddenly seemed more substantial than his own. In his penthouse, he poured himself a rare glass of whiskey and walked out onto the balcony. The city lights sparkled below, countless lives playing out in those illuminated windows. How many of those people were sitting down to dinner with loved ones? How many were bathing children, helping with homework, sharing the small moments that formed the foundation of a life well lived? His phone buzzed. Another crisis, another decision needed. He ignored it. Instead, he walked to the bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of his nightstand. Inside was a small wooden box, well worn and clearly cherished. He carried it to the living room and set it on the coffee table, staring at it for long moments before finally opening the lid. Inside were photographs, physical prints, not digital files. Memories from before Zenith Tech, before Billions, before he became the Kian Patel who appeared on magazine covers. The first photo showed a much younger Kian with his parents outside their modest home in Mumbai, his father's arm around his shoulders, pride evident in his smile. The next, Kian and Dante celebrating their first successful prototype. Champagne in plastic cups, exhaustion and elation on their faces. And then, buried deeper, Kian with a beautiful woman on a beach at sunset. Leela, his fiancée once. Before Zenith Tech took off, before he postponed the wedding just until things settled down, before she finally gave him back the ring and told him she couldn't compete with his ambition. He'd made his choice then. The company over everything. It had seemed so clear at the time. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. His mother's name appeared on the screen. "Amma," he answered, his voice softening as it always did for her. "Beta, how are you?" Her voice, warm and familiar, came through clearly despite the thousands of miles between San Francisco and Mumbai. "I'm fine, Amma. Just busy with work. Always work." She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Have you eaten properly today?" Kian realized he hadn't. "I'll order something soon." "Order." She sighed. Always alone in that big house. "It's not natural." He smiled despite himself. "Apartment, Amma. It's called an apartment here. House, apartment, palace, all the same when you're alone in it." She paused. "I saw Dante's baby on the Facebook. Such a beautiful boy." "Yes, I saw the picture too. You know what would make me happy before I leave this world? Grandchildren. Someone to carry on after you. Amma, please. You're only 65, and we've talked about this." "Yes, yes, I know. The great Kian Patel is too busy to find a wife." Her tone was teasing, but Kian heard the genuine concern underneath. "But time passes, Beta. Faster than you think." They talked for a while longer, about her health, the latest neighborhood gossip, his cousin's new restaurant. When they finally hung up, Kian felt the familiar pang of homesickness that always followed their calls. He returned to the balcony, nursing his whiskey. The city continued its nighttime dance below, but Kian barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, turning over possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider in years. Family, children, legacy beyond quarterly reports and product launches. He thought of Dante's face when he showed him the baby picture. The pure joy, the sense of purpose that transcended stock prices and market share. Kian set down his glass and returned to his office. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he began typing into the search bar. Surrogacy options for single parents. The search returned thousands of results. Kian read through article after article, clinic reviews, legal requirements. The more he read, the more the idea crystallized in his mind. He didn't need to find a partner first. He didn't need to reorganize his entire life. He could be a father on his own terms. By midnight, he had compiled a short list of the most reputable agencies. By 1 a.m., he had scheduled consultations with 3 of them. By 2 a.m., he had drafted an email to his attorney to begin preparing the necessary legal framework. And at 3:17 a.m., exactly 24 hours after Dante's son had entered the world, Kian sent an email to Elite Gestational Services, the most exclusive surrogacy agency on the West Coast. "I am interested in your surrogacy program for single fathers. I would appreciate a confidential consultation at your earliest convenience. Time is of the essence." He signed it simply, Kian Patel, CEO, Zenith Tech Industries. After sending it, he felt a curious lightness, as if making the decision had lifted a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. He slept deeply that night for the first time in months. The agency's response came just after dawn, as Kian was completing his morning meditation. "Mr. Patel, thank you for your inquiry. We would be honored to assist you on your journey to parenthood. By a fortunate coincidence, we have just matched with an exceptional surrogate who meets all our highest standards. Her profile suggests she would be perfect for your situation. She has specifically requested to work with a single parent. Would you be available to meet with us this afternoon? We believe this may be an ideal match." Kian read the email twice, surprised by the speed of the response. He had expected weeks of screening, interviews, profiles to review, not an immediate match. It seemed too good to be true. He hesitated only briefly before clearing his afternoon schedule and confirming the appointment. As he prepared for his morning meetings, Kian felt something he hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. Not for a product launch or quarterly results, but for a possibility, a future that extended beyond the next fiscal year. Little did Kian know, the woman they'd chosen for him carried a secret that would test everything he believed about trust. If you're feeling Kian's loneliness right now, hit that like button. We all deserve love, don't we? Even billionaires with everything money can buy still need what only the heart can provide. Nina Bosco had already given up one child. Now she was about to carry another. Morning light filtered through the large windows of Nina's Oakland apartment, casting warm rectangles across the hardwood floor. The modest one, Bedroom space felt larger than its actual dimensions thanks to Nina's artistic touch. Walls painted in soothing blues and greens, furniture carefully arranged to maximize flow, and strategically placed mirrors that reflected light into every corner. In the living room corner stood an easel, a half-finished watercolor depicting the Bay Bridge at sunset. Paint-splattered jars lined a small table beside it, brushes soaking in cloudy water. Nina moved through her morning routine with quiet purpose, stopping occasionally to add a stroke to the canvas when inspiration struck. At 30, Nina possessed a serene confidence that hadn't come easily. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, revealing high cheekbones and expressive brown eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes had seen more than most, had shed more tears than she cared to admit, but had never lost their fundamental warmth. She checked her phone. A notification from Elite Gestational Services reminded her of today's appointment. Nina took a deep breath, placing a protective hand over her still flat abdomen. Not yet pregnant, but soon, if all went according to plan. The thought sent a mixture of emotions coursing through her: excitement, nervousness, and a whisper of old pain she quickly pushed aside. This time is different, she reminded herself softly. This time you're giving, not losing. The application process had been rigorous. Medical examinations, psychological evaluations, background checks, financial assessments. Nina had passed them all with flying colors, impressing the agency with her stability and commitment. She'd expected nothing less. Elite Gestational Services catered to the wealthiest clients, and Nina knew their standards would be exacting. What had surprised her was how right it felt. From the moment she'd first considered surrogacy, something had clicked into place, as if her past had been preparing her for this moment all along. Nina moved to the small kitchen to prepare her breakfast smoothie: kale, banana, almond milk, and a careful selection of prenatal supplements she'd already begun taking in preparation. The regimen was strict: no alcohol, no caffeine, organic foods only, moderate exercise, 8 hours of sleep every night. She'd been following it for weeks, her body becoming a temple for the child she would eventually carry. As she sipped her smoothie, Nina glanced at the refrigerator door where a small calendar hung. Red circles marked important dates, doctor appointments, agency meetings, the projected timeline for embryo transfer if all went well. Beside it, pinned with a magnet shaped like a pallet, was a list titled Surrogate Fund Goals. The financial aspect wasn't something Nina liked to dwell on, but it was undeniably important. The compensation would finally allow her to pay off the medical debt that had accumulated during her mother's cancer treatment 3 years ago. It would provide a cushion so she could focus on her art full-time rather than juggling freelance graphic design jobs, and perhaps most importantly, it would fund the small art therapy program she dreamed of starting for children in the foster system, children like she had once been, before her mother had regained custody. Her phone chimed with a text from Mila. "Good luck today. Coffee after? Oh wait, herbal tea for you now, right?" Nina smiled and typed back. And tea would be perfect. Cafe sunrise at 4. Mila had been her rock through everything: her mother's illness, her breakup with Hector, and now this new journey. When Nina had first mentioned the idea of becoming a surrogate, Mila hadn't judged or questioned. She'd simply asked, "Are you sure you're ready for this? Emotionally?" A valid question given Nina's history. As she dressed for her appointment, Nina's eyes drifted to the small wooden box on her dresser. She rarely opened it now, but its contents were etched in her memory: a tiny hospital bracelet, a lock of dark hair, a single Polaroid photograph of a newborn with Nina's eyes. Sophia would be 10 now. 10 years since that horrible winter when Nina, barely 20, had made the hardest decision of her life. She had been a sophomore in college, studying art on a partial scholarship, working 2 jobs to cover the rest. Her mother had been between homes, her younger siblings staying with an aunt temporarily. And Hector, charming, ambitious Hector, had been planning their future together. Until the pregnancy test came back positive. Nina had expected support. Instead, Hector disappeared, leaving only a note explaining he wasn't ready for this level of commitment. Her scholarship prohibited students with dependents. Her minimum wage jobs wouldn't cover childcare. Her family, already struggling, couldn't help. Abortion wasn't an option for Nina. Not with her beliefs, not with the flutters she already felt in her heart when she thought of the baby. She'd considered every possibility, calculated every scenario, cried through countless nights. In the end, there had been only one path forward that ensured her. Child would have the stability Nina herself had lacked growing up. An open adoption. A loving family with resources she couldn't provide. A chance for her daughter to thrive rather than struggle. The decision had nearly broken her. For months afterward, Nina had moved through life like a ghost, going through motions without feeling, creating art that her professors described as haunting and raw with grief. She'd received updates and photos for the first 2 years, treasuring each one, before the adoptive family had gently ceased communication, a common occurrence, the agency had warned her, as families established their new normal. Nina had respected their decision, even as it reopened the wound. She'd thrown herself into her studies, graduated with honors, built a life piece by careful piece. She dated occasionally but never allowed anyone close enough to hurt her again. Until Hector had reappeared 5 years later, full of apologies and promises. "I was young and scared," he'd said, eyes pleading. "I've grown up. I've never stopped thinking about you." Against her better judgment, against Mila's warnings, Nina had given him a second chance. For a while, it had seemed like the fairy tale ending. He'd been attentive, supportive, talking about marriage and the family they would build together. Then her mother had been diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. Nina had dropped everything to become her caregiver. Her siblings were still in high school, too young to shoulder such responsibility. Medical bills mounted. Nina's freelance work suffered as she spent days in hospital rooms and nights researching treatments. Hector had been patient at first, bringing meals to the hospital, covering Nina's portion of the rent when she couldn't work. But as weeks stretched into months, his calls became less frequent, his visits shorter. "I need space," he'd finally said. "This isn't what I signed up for." History repeated itself. Once again, Nina faced crisis alone. But this time had been different. This time, she'd discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She'd coordinated her mother's care, fought with insurance companies, researched clinical trials, all while ensuring her siblings stayed in school and had some semblance of normalcy. When her mother finally entered remission, Nina had felt a curious sense of power. She had survived the worst, twice now, and remained standing. She could handle anything life threw at her, which was why, when she'd spotted the magazine article about surrogacy in a doctor's waiting room, something had resonated deeply. Here was a way to use her strength to help others, to transform her pain into purpose. And yes, to reclaim some of what had been taken from her, the experience of pregnancy, the joy of bringing life into the world, the knowledge that she was creating a family. Only this time, her eyes would be wide open. This time, she would be giving a gift freely, not making a sacrifice out of desperation. "You heading out?" Mila asked, perched on Nina's couch later that afternoon. They'd met at the cafe as planned, and Mila had insisted on coming. Back to the apartment to hear all the details of the agency meeting. "The profile came in this morning," Nina explained, pulling out her tablet. "I'm supposed to review it before tomorrow's meeting. They actually let you see who the potential parents are?" Mila asked, surprised. "Elite does things differently. They believe in making intentional matches based on compatibility, not just medical factors." Nina tapped the screen, bringing up a password-protected file. "I don't know much yet, just that he's a single father by choice. Apparently that's becoming more common among their clientele." "He? So it's just a guy? No partner?" Nina nodded. "The counselor mentioned he's some kind of executive, busy career, wants a family but hasn't found the right relationship. They said he specifically requested a surrogate who would be comfortable with his involvement during the pregnancy. And you're okay with that?" Mila's voice held a note of concern. "Actually, yes. I'd rather know the person whose child I'm carrying than have it be completely anonymous." Nina hesitated. "And I think it might be healing in a way. To see the joy this will bring him." Mila squeezed her hand. "Just be careful with your heart, okay?" This isn't going to be like having your own baby. You can't get too attached. I know, Nina said quietly. That's part of why I want to do this, to prove to myself that I can carry a child and let go with joy instead of grief. After Mila left, Nina settled on her small balcony with a cup of chamomile tea, the tablet in her lap. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine from the potted plants surrounding her. She took a deep breath and opened the file. The profile began with basic information: a name, Kian Patel, and age, 38, an occupation, chief executive. Officer in health, excellent and netted genetic screening, clear, until Nina scrolled down to the personal statement section. I believe family is the most important legacy we create. My career has given me much to be proud of, but I've reached a point where I want something more meaningful than professional success. I want to be a father, to teach, to nurture, to love. I'm financially and emotionally prepared for single parenthood, and while I have demanding work responsibilities, I've already begun restructuring my life to prioritize family. I'm looking for a surrogate who understands the profound nature of this journey and would welcome appropriate involvement throughout the process. There was something refreshingly honest about his words. No flowery language, no desperate pleading, just straightforward purpose. Then she scrolled to his photograph. Kian Patel had striking features, strong jawline, intelligent dark eyes, and the subtle confidence of someone who had built himself from the ground up. He wasn't smiling in the photo, not fully, but there was a warmth in his expression that Nina found instantly compelling. He stood beside a large window, city lights spread out behind him, dressed in a simple button-down shirt, rather than the formal suit she might have expected from a CEO. "Oh," Nina whispered, surprised by her reaction. There was something in his eyes, a loneliness she recognized, a determination she understood. For a moment, she felt an unexpected connection, as if she knew this man somehow. She scrolled further, reading about his background. Born in Mumbai, moved to the United States. For college, built a tech company called Zenith Tech that specialized in AL solutions. The name sounded vaguely familiar. She'd probably seen it on products or in news headlines. The more Nina read, the more certain she became. This felt right. This man, this arrangement, it aligned with everything she was looking for. She was about to close the file when a notification slid onto her screen. A new message from the agency. "Nina, we're pleased to inform you that Mr. Patel has reviewed your profile and expressed strong interest in moving forward. He's requested an in-person meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. if you're available. Please confirm at your earliest convenience." Her heart beat faster. This was happening quickly, more quickly than she'd anticipated. Usually, these processes took weeks of careful consideration on both sides. She typed a response confirming her availability, then set the tablet aside, trying to process her emotions. Excitement, yes, but also a flutter of anxiety. What if he asked questions about her past? The agency knew the basics of her history. They had to, for medical and psychological screening, but not the details, not the emotion behind the clinical facts. Nina rose from her chair and moved to the kitchen, pouring herself another cup of tea with slightly trembling hands. On the refrigerator, next to her calendar, hung a small affirmation she'd written to herself years ago. "Your past shapes you but doesn't define you." She traced the words with her fingertip, drawing strength from them. She had been honest with the agency about having previously been pregnant. She had provided the medical records they required, but she hadn't shared the full story. The abandonment, the poverty, the impossible choice. Nina had convinced herself it wasn't relevant, that a clinical history was sufficient, that the emotional aspect was her private burden to bear. But now, faced with meeting this man, this Kian Patel, with the lonely eyes who wanted to be a father, she wondered if her omissions constituted a kind of deception. Would he want to know the full circumstances? Would it change his opinion of her? Would he question her ability to separate emotionally after birth if he knew how deeply her previous loss had affected her? Nina leaned against the counter, her tea cooling forgotten beside her. A memory surfaced, sitting in a sterile office 10 years ago, signing papers that terminated. Her parental rights, the social worker's kind but firm voice. This is a closed chapter now. For everyone's well-being, especially the child's, it's best to move forward, not back. She had lived by those words, buried that chapter so deeply that sometimes she could almost convince herself it had happened to someone else. She'd built a new identity, Nina the artist, Nina the survivor, Nina the caregiver. Not Nina the birth mother who gave away her baby. But now that buried history felt dangerously close to the surface. If she proceeded with this surrogacy, every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every kick would echo with memories she'd fought to contain. "I can do this," she whispered to her empty kitchen. "I'm stronger now." Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. It was the agency. "Nina, I'm calling with some additional information about tomorrow's meeting." The coordinator's voice was professional but warm. "Mr. Patel has requested that we expedite the process if the meeting goes well. Apparently his schedule will become extremely complicated in about 3 months due to a global product launch, and he'd like to complete the initial procedures before then if possible." "How expedited are we talking about?" Nina asked, surprised. "If you both agree to move forward, we could potentially handle the legal paperwork this week and schedule the medical procedures within the month. Of course, this is completely your decision. There's no pressure to accelerate if you're not comfortable." Nina found herself nodding. "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." After hanging up, she walked to her bedroom window, looking out at the Oakland skyline in the distance. Tomorrow she would meet Kian Patel. Tomorrow could change everything. She tried to imagine him, not just the photograph, but the man himself. Would he be cold and businesslike? Warm and personable? Would they connect, or would the meeting be awkward and strained? And flash forward. Nina walked into a sleek conference room, nervous energy coursing through her veins. A tall figure rising from a chair, extending his hand. "Miss Bosco, I'm Kian Patel." Their hands meeting. A brief moment of contact that somehow feels significant. His eyes, warmer in person than in his photograph, studying her face with undisguised curiosity. A surprising gentleness in his voice as he says, "Thank you for considering this. I know what an extraordinary gift you're offering." Back to present. Nina blinked, the vision fading. She hadn't expected to feel such a strong pull toward this arrangement. Toward this stranger who wanted to be a father, perhaps it was, because she recognized in him something of herself, someone who wanted family badly enough to pursue unconventional paths, to find it. She moved to her easel, picking up a brush and dipping it in blue paint. Art had always been her way of processing emotions too complex for words. As she added careful strokes to the canvas, blending colors to capture the precise quality of evening light on water, Nina made her decision. She would meet Kian Patel tomorrow. She would move forward with this surrogacy if the meeting confirmed her instincts, and she would keep her past exactly where it belonged. Behind her, a closed chapter. But Nina knew if this billionaire discovered her secret, everything would crumble. The contract was supposed to keep them apart. Instead, it brought them together. Elite gestational services occupied the entire 15th floor of a modern medical building in downtown San Francisco. The waiting room bore little resemblance to typical clinical spaces. Plush seating arrangements, artwork by local artists, and soft instrumental music created an atmosphere more reminiscent of a luxury hotel lobby than a medical facility. Nina arrived 15 minutes early, her portfolio clutched perhaps too tightly in her hands. She'd dressed carefully that morning, a navy blue dress that was professional, without being severe, comfortable low heels, minimal jewelry. Her dark hair was loosely pulled back, a few strands framing her face. She wanted to appear composed, reliable, the perfect surrogate candidate. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. "Miss Bosco," the receptionist greeted her warmly. "You're right on time. Would you like some tea while you wait?" "No, thank you," Nina replied, her mouth too dry with nervousness to consider drinking anything. She settled into one of the comfortable chairs, glancing occasionally at the elevator doors. The agency had explained that Mr. Patel, Kian, would arrive separately and they would meet in a conference room with agency representatives present. Everything carefully orchestrated, properly supervised, professional. At precisely 2 p.m., the elevator doors slid open. Nina recognized him immediately from his photograph, though the man who stepped into the waiting area possessed a presence that no image could fully capture. Tall and broad-shouldered, Kian Patel moved with quiet confidence, his dark suit impeccably tailored. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Nina with startling intensity. Time seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Then he smiled, just slightly, and Nina felt something unexpected shift inside her chest. "Mr. Patel," the receptionist said, rising to greet him. "Welcome back. Miss Bosco has arrived as well. If you'll both follow me, everyone is waiting in the Azure room." Kian approached Nina, extending his hand. "Ms. Bosco? I'm Kian Patel." His handshake was warm and firm, his eyes never leaving hers. Up close, Nina noticed details absent from his photograph. A tiny scar near his right eyebrow, the way one corner of his mouth lifted slightly, higher than the other when he smiled, the gentle creases around his eyes suggesting he laughed more than his serious demeanor implied. "It's nice to meet you," Nina said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Please, call me Nina." "Nina," he repeated, as if testing the name. "And I'm Kian." They followed the receptionist down a hallway lined with serene landscape photographs to a medium-sized conference room where two women waited, Dr. Melissa Chen, the medical director, and Sophia Williams, the legal coordinator. "Wonderful, you're both here," Dr. Chen said, gesturing to the chairs. "Let's begin." What followed was a meeting unlike any Nina had expected. Rather than the clinical exchange of information she'd anticipated, the conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by moments of genuine connection. Kian spoke about his company, his vision for fatherhood, his plans for balancing work with family. Nina shared her artistic background, her community involvement, her reasons for becoming a surrogate. They discovered mutual interests. Both loved historical documentaries, preferred savory over sweet, enjoyed hiking coastal trails. "Your profile mentioned you're originally from Mumbai," Nina asked during a brief pause. "Yes, I moved to the States for college," Kian replied. "Though my mother still lives there. She's very excited about becoming a grandmother. She knows about the surrogacy. She knows I'm pursuing fatherhood, yes. My mother is traditional in many ways, but surprisingly progressive in others." His expression softened when speaking about his family. "She told me that children are a blessing regardless of how they come to you." As the meeting progressed, Nina found herself increasingly drawn to Kian's thoughtfulness. He asked intelligent questions about her health, her support system, her comfort with various aspects of surrogacy. None of his concerns felt invasive. Rather, they reflected genuine care for her well-being throughout the process. "I want to be clear," Kian said toward the end of the meeting, "that while I hope to be involved in the pregnancy journey, I would never want to intrude or make you uncomfortable. Your boundaries are important to me." Nina felt a wave of relief. This was what she'd hoped for, an intended parent who would be present, without being controlling, involved, without being overwhelming. "I'd welcome your involvement," she said honestly. "This is your child. You should experience as much of the journey as possible." When the 2-hour meeting concluded, both Nina and Kian expressed interest in moving forward. The agency representatives exchanged pleased glances. Clearly, their instincts about this match had been correct. "If you're both comfortable proceeding," Sophia said, gathering her papers, "we can schedule the contract review for later this week. Given Mr. Patel's timeline constraints, we've prepared to expedite the process." Nina nodded. "That works for me." "Excellent," Kian said, then hesitated before adding, "Nina, would you have time for a coffee? I have a few more questions that are perhaps less formal than what we've covered here." Nina felt both surprised and pleased by the invitation. "I'd like that." They found a quiet cafe a block from the medical building. Despite the professional nature of their relationship, conversation flowed easily between them. Kian asked about her art, genuinely interested in her creative process. Nina inquired about his company, listening attentively as he described the AI technology that had made Zenith Tech a global leader. "I've dominated the conversation," Kian said suddenly, looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I rarely get to talk about the technical aspects with someone who isn't trying to either invest in or compete with me." Nina laughed. "Don't apologize. It's fascinating. Though I admit some of it went over my head. What about your art? Do you have photos?" Nina hesitated, then pulled out her phone, scrolling to a gallery of her recent work. Kian studied each image with surprising attention, asking thoughtful questions about her techniques and inspiration. "You're very talented," he said, handing back her phone. "You capture emotion in a way that feels honest." Nina felt herself blush slightly at the genuine compliment. "Thank you." When they finally parted ways, Nina was struck by how comfortable the afternoon had been. For a man with Kian's wealth and position, he possessed a remarkable lack of pretension. His interest in her work and thoughts had seemed sincere, his respect for her role evident in every interaction. 3 days later, they met again, this time in a conference room at Kian's attorney's office, surrounded by stacks of legal documents that would formalize their arrangement. The contracts were comprehensive, covering every possible scenario from medical complications to custody specifications. "It's a lot," Sophia acknowledged as Nina flipped through the pages. "Take your time. Ask any questions you have." Nina read carefully, occasionally requesting clarification on legal terminology. Across the table, Kian did the same, his expression serious as he reviewed the documents that would set their journey in motion. One clause caught Nina's attention, as Surrogate agrees to disclose any and all relevant medical and psychological history that may impact the pregnancy or the child's health. Her heart stuttered briefly. She had disclosed her previous pregnancy in the medical questionnaire. That was part of her record. But the emotional context, the circumstances, those remained private. "Everything all right?" Kian asked, noticing her pause. Nina looked up, meeting his concerned gaze. "Yes, just being thorough." By the end of the 4-hour session, their hands were cramped from initialing pages, but the legal framework was complete. As they signed the final documents, Kian and Nina exchanged a look of shared accomplishment, the first step of many they would take together. "Well," Kian said as they stood to leave, "I guess we're officially in this together now." Nina smiled. "I guess we are." Neither could have predicted how quickly their relationship would evolve beyond the boundaries of their contract. The medical procedures began the following week. Nina underwent the preparatory treatments with Kian accompanying her to every appointment. He arranged his schedule around her medical visits, surprising his executive team with blocked-off afternoons and early mornings. "Is everything okay, sir?" his assistant asked after the third rescheduled board meeting. "Everything is fine," Kian replied. "Better than fine, actually." During the hormone treatments, Nina experienced mood swings and discomfort that she tried to minimize during their interactions. But Kian noticed anyway. "You don't need to pretend you're feeling well for my benefit," he told her gently after a particularly difficult appointment. "This process is challenging. I respect your honesty more than your stoicism." That simple statement, the permission to be authentic rather than perfect, marked a turning point. Nina began sharing more openly about the physical and emotional aspects of the process. Kian listened attentively, researched ways to alleviate her symptoms, and adjusted their meeting times to accommodate her energy levels. When the embryo transfer was scheduled, Kian asked hesitantly if she wanted him present for the procedure. "Of course," Nina said without hesitation. "This is your child's beginning." In the sterile medical room, Nina lay on the examination table, Kian seated beside her. As the doctor prepared for the transfer, Kian surprised Nina by reaching for her hand. His palm was warm against hers, his grip steady. Neither spoke, words seemed inadequate for the moment. But in that silent connection, something shifted between them, a boundary crossed that neither had anticipated. The 2-week wait that followed was excruciating. Nina tried to maintain her normal routine, painting, meeting with clients, having lunch with Mila, but her thoughts constantly returned to the life that might be growing inside her. Kian called every evening, ostensibly to check on her well-being, but their conversations quickly expanded beyond health updates. They discussed books they were reading, documentaries they'd watched, memories from their childhoods. Without the formal structure of agency meetings, their natural rapport blossomed. The morning of the pregnancy test, Kian insisted on accompanying Nina to the clinic. They sat side by side in the waiting room, neither speaking much, both lost in their own thoughts. When Dr. Chen entered with the results, her smile told them everything before she spoke. "Congratulations," she said. "The test is positive." Kian's composed facade cracked. His eyes filled with tears as he turned to Nina, who was beaming despite her own emotional overwhelm. Without thinking, he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you." Nina returned the hug, surprised by how natural it felt to be in his arms. "We did it," she said softly. They celebrated that evening with dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the bay. Kian ordered sparkling cider instead of champagne, raising his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "To new beginnings," Nina echoed, feeling as though they were marking something beyond just the pregnancy. As weeks passed and Nina's body began changing, their lives intertwined in ways neither had anticipated. Kian researched pregnancy nutrition obsessively, sending Nina daily articles and meal suggestions. Nina found his concern endearing rather than invasive, especially when he began delivering weekly food packages from an organic meal service he'd personally vetted. Their first ultrasound appointment brought another evolution in their relationship. As the grainy image appeared on the screen, a tiny flickering heartbeat visible, Kian's hand found Nina's again. This time, she interlaced her fingers with his without hesitation. "That's your baby," she whispered, watching his awestruck expression. "Our baby," he corrected softly. At least for now. The technician printed photos for them both. Later, Nina would find hers carefully placed in her purse with a note from Kian, no words adequate. Forever grateful. Without formal discussion, they established weekend routines. Sundays became their day. Morning walks in Golden Gate Park, lunch at whichever restaurant caught their interest, afternoons spent in comfortable conversation. During one such afternoon, Kian surprised Nina with a gift, a small sketchbook and set of travel watercolors. "I noticed you're always observing everything around you," he explained. "I thought you might want to capture some moments from this journey." Nina was touched by his thoughtfulness. "This is perfect, thank you." She began using the sketchbook immediately, capturing scenes from their Sunday outings, moments in waiting rooms, the changing seasons outside her window. Some pages held quick studies of Kian himself, his profile as he gazed out over the bay, his hands gesturing as he explained a complex concept, his rare but transformative full smile. When Nina experienced her first bout of morning sickness, ironically in the evening, Kian arrived at her apartment with ginger tea, bland crackers, and a willingness to sit quietly while she recovered. He never complained about the inconvenience or expressed disgust at her illness. Instead, he held back her hair, refreshed cool cloths for her forehead, and read aloud from a novel they'd both been discussing to distract her from the nausea. "You don't have to do this," Nina protested weakly during a pause in the reading. "I know," Kian replied simply. "I want to." That night, after Nina had fallen asleep on the couch, Kian covered her with a blanket and let himself out quietly. In the morning, she found her kitchen stocked with gentle foods and a note on her counter, "And text if you need anything at all. Rest well." At 14 weeks, they returned to the clinic for another ultrasound. This appointment would be significant, a detailed anatomy scan, and, potentially, the revelation of the baby's sex. "Do you want to know?" the technician asked as they settled into the now familiar exam room. Kian looked at Nina. "It's up to you." "I'd like to know," Nina said. "It makes it more real, somehow." They watched in silence as the technician conducted the scan, pointing out tiny hands, feet, the curve of the spine, the chambers of the heart. Everything looked perfect, a healthy, developing fetus right on schedule. And, the technician said with a smile. "It looks like you're having a little girl." Kian's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. "A daughter," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Nina felt tears spring to her eyes, moved by his reaction. "A daughter," she repeated, squeezing his hand. Later, walking through a small neighborhood park, Kian seemed lost in thought. Nina gave him space, understanding the magnitude of the day's revelation. "I never had a sister," he finally said. "I don't know much about raising girls." Nina smiled. "You'll learn. Will you help me?" The question came out quietly, hesitantly. "I mean, even after—" "I'd value your insight." The request touched Nina deeply. "Of course I will," she promised, not fully examining what that might mean for her emotional boundaries. That evening, Kian surprised her again. "I've been thinking about names," he said as they shared a meal at her favorite Italian restaurant. "I'd like your input, if you're comfortable with that." Nina nodded, curious about his ideas. "I was considering Amara," he said. "It means eternal or unfading in Sanskrit." "My mother suggested it." "Amara," Nina repeated, feeling the name in her mouth. "It's beautiful." "You really think so?" His expression was hopeful, eager for her approval. "I do. Amara Patel sounds perfect." Kian's smile was radiant. "Then, Amara, she'll be—" As Nina's pregnancy progressed, their connection deepened. Kian began attending her prenatal yoga classes, awkwardly attempting poses that Nina executed with grace. They created a shared playlist for the baby, each adding songs that held special meaning. When Nina mentioned wanting to create a mural for the nursery, Kian invited her to his penthouse to see the room he'd designated for his daughter. "I haven't decorated yet," he explained, leading her into a spacious room with windows overlooking the bay. "I wanted your artistic input." Nina was touched by his inclusion. Together, they designed a nature-themed nursery with gentle forest elements. When Kian insisted on hiring professional decorators, Nina convinced him to participate in painting at least one wall himself. "Your daughter should know her father helped create her first space," she argued. The weekend they spent painting the nursery became one of Nina's favorite memories. Kian, dressed in old jeans and a t-shirt instead of his usual impeccable suits, carefully following Nina's instructions. His concentrated expression as he detailed a small tree branch. The smudge of pale green paint he unknowingly wore on his cheek for hours, making him look endearingly human. Halfway through the afternoon, Nina felt the baby kick, stronger than ever before. "Oh," she exclaimed, her hand flying to her belly. Kian turned, concern crossing his features. "What is it? Are you all right?" "She's kicking," Nina explained. "Really kicking. Come feel—" Without hesitation, Kian crossed the room. Nina took his hand and placed it where the movement was strongest. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a decisive thump pushed against his palm. Kian's face transformed with wonder. "That's incredible," he whispered, kneeling to be level with Nina's belly. "Hello, Amara. It's your father." As if in response, another kick landed precisely where his hand rested. Kian looked up at Nina, his eyes shining. "She knows me." "Of course she does," Nina said softly. "You talk to her every day." It was true. Kian had developed the habit of speaking directly to Nina's growing belly during their time together, telling Amara about his day, describing the world she would soon join, promising all the things they would do together. The intimate moment in the nursery marked another shift in their relationship. Physical boundaries relaxed naturally. Kian's hand often rested on Nina's belly during conversations. Nina would touch his arm to emphasize a point. They hugged in greeting and parting without awkwardness. To any observer, they appeared to be an expectant couple, eagerly awaiting their child's arrival. Even Kian's closest friends made this assumption when they finally met Nina at a small dinner gathering. "You're radiant," Dante's wife told Nina as they sat in Kian's living room. "How far along are you now?" 26 weeks, Nina replied, conscious of Kian watching her from across the room, a soft expression on his face. "And how did you two meet?" another friend asked. Kian's been suspiciously quiet about the details. Nina glanced at Kian, unsure how to respond. They hadn't discussed how to explain their relationship to others. Kian moved to sit beside her on the couch. "We met through mutual connections," he said smoothly. "The timing was perfect. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the complete truth either." Nina felt a twinge of unease at the omission, but pushed it aside. Their arrangement was personal and complex, difficult to explain to outsiders. Later that evening, after the guests had departed, Kian and Nina stood on his balcony, watching lights shimmer across the bay. A comfortable silence stretched between them, broken only when Amara delivered a particularly energetic kick. "She's going to be a dancer," Kian joked, his hand finding its now familiar place on Nina's belly. Nina laughed. "Or a martial artist." The moment felt perfect. The cool evening air, the beautiful view, the warmth of Kian's presence beside her. Nina found herself wishing it could always be this way. The thought startled her. This wasn't supposed to be her family. Amara wasn't her daughter to keep. Kian wasn't her partner. Their contract explicitly outlined her role, to carry this child and then step back, allowing Kian to be the parent. Yet somewhere along this journey, the boundaries had blurred. Nina couldn't pinpoint exactly when her feelings had shifted, when professional appreciation had transformed into personal affection, when affection had deepened into something more profound. Kian seemed to sense her sudden tension. "Everything okay?" Nina nodded, forcing a smile. "Just tired. It's been a long day. I'll drive you home," he offered immediately. As they drove through the night-quiet streets, Nina wondered if Kian felt it too, this connection. That had grown between them, far exceeding the parameters of their agreement. Sometimes, she caught him looking at her with an expression that suggested he might. But neither of them had dared to name it, to acknowledge the unspoken evolution of their relationship. After Kian dropped her off, Nina stood in her apartment, suddenly aware of how empty it felt after the warmth of his presence. She moved to her refrigerator, where the latest ultrasound image hung alongside. Her schedule of prenatal appointments, all with Kian's name noted as attending. What would happen after Amara was born? Would their Sunday traditions continue? Would Kian still want her input on parenting decisions? Or would he gently but firmly establish boundaries, refocusing on his role as a single father? The thought of losing their connection made Nina's chest ache in a way that frightened her. She hadn't planned to care this much, about Kian or about the baby she carried for him. The surrogate intended parent relationship was supposed to remain professional, emotional but bounded. Instead, she found herself falling for this thoughtful, brilliant man who spoke so tenderly to his unborn daughter, who remembered Nina's favorite tea, who shared his vulnerabilities alongside his dreams. A few miles away, Kian stood in the newly painted nursery, thinking similar thoughts. His friends had noticed the change in him, commented on it repeatedly throughout the evening. "I've never seen you like this," Dante had said when they had a moment alone. "You seem happy, genuinely happy." "I'm excited about becoming a father," Kian had replied. Dante's knowing look suggested he wasn't convinced that was the entire explanation. "It's more than that. The way you look at her. There's something there, isn't there?" Kian hadn't answered directly. How could he explain feelings he barely understood himself? Nina had entered his life as a surrogate, a biological vessel for his child. Now she was... what? A friend seemed inadequate. A CO parent wasn't quite right either. He touched the wall they had painted together, tracing the delicate branch pattern Nina had designed. Everything in this room bore her influence. Colors chosen with her artistic eye, furniture arranged according to her intuitive sense of flow, even the small bookshelf filled with titles she had recommended for various stages of childhood. Kian tried to imagine the room without her touch, to picture his life with Amara but without Nina's warm presence. The image felt wrong, incomplete, but their contract was clear. Nina was the surrogate, not the mother. Once Amara was born, Nina would resume her own life, while Kian began his journey as a father. That was the arrangement they had both agreed to, the boundaries they had established. Boundaries that had grown increasingly meaningless with each shared ultrasound. Each Sunday walk, each quiet conversation about hopes and fears and dreams. Neither Kian nor Nina slept well that night, both wrestling with emotions they hadn't anticipated when signing their carefully worded contract, both wondering if the other felt the same confusing blend of attachment and uncertainty, both afraid to disrupt the delicate balance they had established. But happiness built on hidden truths never lasts, and Nina's past was about to surface. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Your share could change a life. One email, one article, one secret that could end everything. The private jet cut through darkened skies, 5,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. Kian had finally surrendered to exhaustion after 16 hours of back-to-back meetings in Tokyo. Zenith Tech was expanding its Asian operations, and his presence had been essential for finalizing partnerships with key manufacturers. Now, as the jet hummed steadily towards San Francisco, he allowed himself a rare moment of complete rest. His laptop remained open beside him, email notifications silently accumulating. One in particular arrived with an innocuous subject line: "Information regarding your surrogate arrangement." The chime of an incoming text message roused Kian from his light sleep. Dante was checking on his arrival time, wanting to schedule a brief meeting before tomorrow's executive session. Kian rubbed his eyes, reaching for his phone to respond, when he noticed the email notification on his laptop screen. The sender's address was unfamiliar, anonymous, created specifically for this purpose. Against his better judgment, curiosity compelled him to open it. "Mr. Patel, as someone who respects your business acumen, I feel obligated to share concerning information about the woman carrying your child. Nina Bosco has not been entirely honest with you or the agency. Public records indicate she gave birth to a child approximately 10 years ago, a fact she has deliberately concealed from you. For verification, see attached news article from the Oakland Chronicle's birth announcements and subsequent adoption notice." And a concerned observer, Kian's blood ran cold. His first instinct was to dismiss it as a cruel prank, or possibly industrial. Espionage competitors had tried to destabilize his personal life before, but something about the specific details gave him pause. With trembling fingers, he clicked the attachment. The article loaded slowly in the plane's limited bandwidth. A scanned newspaper page appeared, yellowed with age. Kian's eyes locked onto the highlighted section. Baby girl Sophia, born to Nina Bosco, 7 lbs 2 ounces, Oakland Memorial Hospital. Below it, a second clipping dated 3 months later. Adoption finalized. Baby girl formerly born to N. Bosco, adopted by the Henderson family of Portland. Kian read the words repeatedly, each time hoping they might somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. The evidence seemed conclusive, yet his mind scrambled for alternative explanations. Perhaps it was another Nina Bosco. Perhaps the records were falsified. Yet deep down, he knew. Small inconsistencies in Nina's medical history that the agency had attributed to normal paperwork issues. Her occasional distant expression when discussions turned to childbirth. Her profound understanding of the adoption process when they discussed potential complications. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Kian made a decision. He wouldn't confront Nina with unfounded accusations. He would investigate thoroughly, confirm the facts, and then, only then, determine how to proceed. For 3 days, Kian maintained their normal routine while conducting his investigation in private. He hired a discreet private investigator with experience in adoption records. He personally visited county offices to examine public birth records. He even reached out to a trusted contact at the surrogacy agency, framing his questions as hypothetical concerns about disclosure requirements. Each inquiry returned the same conclusion: Nina Bosco had indeed given birth to a daughter 10 years ago and placed her for adoption shortly thereafter. None of this information had been explicitly disclosed in her surrogate application, though she had marked yes to previous pregnancies on the medical questionnaire. On the 4th evening, Kian sat alone in his office, surrounded by evidence of Nina's omission. Outside his window, San Francisco glittered as darkness fell, but he barely noticed the view that usually brought him peace. His emotions cycled between anger, betrayal, and a deep, unexpected hurt. Not just because Nina had withheld critical information, though that was significant, but because he had opened himself to her completely. He had shared his vulnerabilities, his hopes, his fears. She had become someone he trusted implicitly, someone he had begun to imagine in his future beyond Amara's birth. And now this. His phone lit up with a text from Nina. An ultrasound tomorrow at 10. Are we still meeting for breakfast first? Baby girl was doing somersaults all day. The casual warmth of her message, the heart emoji she had never used before. The casual warmth of her message, the heart emoji she had never used before, twisted something inside his chest. How could she be so genuine in some ways and yet hide something so fundamental? Kian couldn't pretend any longer. He couldn't sit across from her at breakfast tomorrow, discussing their daughter's development, while this knowledge festered between them. He typed a brief reply, "Need to talk, coming over now." Nina's response was immediate. "Everything okay?" He didn't answer. The drive to Nina's Oakland apartment gave Kian time to organize his thoughts. He rehearsed what he would say, how he would remain calm and objective. This wasn't about his feelings, it was about trust and transparency, in a relationship that, by necessity, required complete honesty. Yet, as he parked outside her building, Kian realized his carefully prepared speech had evaporated. In its place was a single, aching question. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" Nina opened her door, concern immediately evident on her face. She wore simple lounge clothes, leggings and an oversized sweater that accommodated her now, prominent pregnancy. Her hair was pulled up in a messy bun, and she wasn't wearing makeup. In that moment, despite everything, Kian found her achingly beautiful. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping back to let him enter. "Is it the baby? The business?" Kian moved past her into the familiar living room, unable to meet her eyes. He had been here countless times over the past months, for morning pickups before appointments, for quiet evenings reviewing baby books, for Sundays when they planned the nursery. The space felt different now, charged with unspoken tension. "Kian, you're scaring me," Nina said, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. Their daughter. He finally turned to face her, pulling the folder of documents from his bag. "I received some information," he began, his voice steadier than he felt. "About you. About your past." Nina's expression shifted subtly, a tightening around her eyes, a slight paling of her cheeks. She knew. Somehow, before he even explained, she knew exactly what he had discovered. "I need you to be honest with me," Kian continued, opening the folder. "Did you give birth to a child 10 years ago? A daughter you placed for adoption?" The room fell silent. Nina stood perfectly still, one hand still resting on her belly, the other gripping the back of a chair as if for support. Seconds stretched into an eternity before she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." The simple admission hung between them. Despite having seen the evidence, heard the confirmation from multiple sources. Kian felt the impact of her acknowledgement like a physical blow. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, the hurt evident in his voice, despite his efforts to remain detached. Nina closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, tears had gathered at the corners. "I didn't lie on the application. I marked yes to previous pregnancies on the medical forms. You know that's not what I'm asking." Kian's frustration broke through his composed facade. "In all our conversations, all our time together, you never once mentioned having a child. You let me believe this was your first pregnancy. Technically, the agency knew." "I'm not talking about technicalities, Nina." Kian rarely raised his voice, but now his words echoed in the small apartment. "I'm talking about us. About the trust I thought we had built." Nina sank into a chair, as if her legs could no longer support her. "I was afraid," she admitted, her voice small. "Of what? That I would reject your application, that I would judge you." "Yes." She looked up at him, tears now flowing freely. "And because talking about her still hurts. Because I've spent 10 years trying to come to terms with my decision. Because I was 20 years old and alone and terrified, and giving her up was the hardest thing I've ever done. Kian stood frozen, caught between his sense of betrayal and the raw pain evident in Nina's confession. I was a sophomore in college, she continued, words spilling out as if a dam had broken. Working 2 jobs, on scholarship. Her father disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant. My mother was between homes, my siblings staying with relatives. I had nothing to offer a child. No stability, no resources, not even a permanent address. She brushed away tears with the back of her hand. I considered every option. Abortion wasn't something I could live with. Keeping her would have meant dropping out, losing my scholarship probably, ending up in the same cycle of poverty I'd fought so hard to escape. Adoption gave her a chance at the life I couldn't provide. Nina's gaze dropped to her hands, now twisted together in her lap. The Hendersons were wonderful people. Stable, loving, financially secure. Everything I wasn't. The adoption was supposed to be semi-open, but after 2 years the updates stopped coming. That's common, I'm told. Families move on. Create their new normal. Kian moved to the couch, sitting heavily. The anger that had fueled his drive over was ebbing, replaced by confusion and a deep sadness for what Nina had endured alone. Why become a surrogate then? He asked quietly. After that experience, Nina looked up, her eyes meeting his. Because I thought it might heal something in me. Carrying a child, knowing from the beginning that she isn't mine to keep. Giving someone like you the family you deserve, without the desperation and shame that colored my first experience. She took a shaky breath. And because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it right this time, be honest about the arrangement, make peace with the separation, find joy in giving instead of grief in losing. Kian absorbed her words, trying to reconcile the Nina he knew, strong, kind, reliable, with the frightened young woman she described. He thought about what he might have done in her position at 20, alone and without resources. Would he have made different choices? When we met, Nina continued softly, I intended to keep things professional. I didn't expect. Her voice caught. I didn't expect you. How you listen when I speak. How you remember every detail about my preferences. How you look at me sometimes, like I'm something precious. Her vulnerability pierced through Kian's remaining defenses. You are, he said, the words escaping before he could consider them. Nina shook her head. I'm just the woman carrying your child. A woman who was too afraid to tell you her whole truth because she couldn't bear to see disappointment in your eyes. The same disappointment I've seen in my own reflection for 10 years. The rawness of her confession hung in the air between them. Kian found himself at a crossroads. He could walk away, maintain professional distance, for the remainder of the pregnancy, protect himself from further emotional investment. The contractual framework would support such a decision. Or he could choose compassion. Choose understanding over judgment. Choose the connection they had built, imperfect as it might be. Show me, he said finally. Nina looked confused. Show you what? Whatever you've kept of her. I want to understand, not just know the facts, but understand what this means to you. Hesitantly, Nina rose and disappeared into her bedroom. She returned moments later, carrying a small wooden box. With trembling hands, she placed it on the coffee table between them. I don't open this often, she admitted. Kian nodded, understanding the significance of what she was sharing. Nina slowly lifted the lid, revealing the contents, a tiny hospital bracelet, a lock of dark hair secured with a blue ribbon, a Polaroid photograph of a newborn with Nina's eyes, and a few official-looking documents. Sophia, Nina said softly, touching the photo with gentle fingers. That's what I named her. The Hendersons kept it as her middle name. Kian studied the image, seeing the unmistakable resemblance to Nina in the baby's delicate features. She's beautiful, he said honestly. She would be 10 now, 5th grade probably. I wonder if she likes art, or if she's more practical, if she has my mother's laugh or my father's concentration when she reads. The longing in Nina's voice was palpable. Kian realized with sudden clarity that her past wasn't just a fact she had omitted. It was a wound she carried every day, a loss that had shaped her entire adult life. "I understand why you didn't tell me," he said finally. Nina looked up, surprise evident through her tears. "You do. Not at first, maybe. But now." Kian gestured to the box between them. "This isn't just information, Nina. This is your heart. You were protecting yourself. I should have trusted you. After everything, I should have found the courage to tell you." "Yes," Kian agreed gently. "You should have. But fear isn't rational. It doesn't follow logical patterns." He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I'm still hurt that you didn't confide in me. I won't pretend otherwise. But I'm trying to understand." Nina's fingers tightened around his. "What happens now?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than their immediate situation. Kian considered carefully before answering. His initial impulse upon discovering Nina's secret had been withdrawal, emotional, if not contractual. Yet sitting here, witnessing her pain and courage, he found that impulse had transformed into something entirely different. "Now," he said, "we move forward. Together. Just like that." Nina's voice held disbelief. "Not just like that," Kian corrected. "With eyes open. With honesty between us from this point forward. No more secrets, no more omissions." He moved to sit beside her on the couch, still holding her hand. "I've spent my life making decisions based on facts and logic, analyzing risks, calculating outcomes. But this, us, it doesn't fit into spreadsheets or probability models." Nina gave a watery laugh. "I suppose not. The fact is," Kian continued, "these past months with you have been extraordinary. You've changed how I see the world, how I think about family, about connection. I'm not willing to discard that because you made a difficult choice in your past, or because you were afraid to tell me about it." Fresh tears spilled down Nina's cheeks. "I don't deserve your understanding." "It's not about deserving," Kian said firmly. "It's about choosing, and I'm choosing to understand rather than judge, to forgive rather than resent." He reached up, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. The gesture was intimate, crossing boundaries they had carefully maintained despite their growing closeness. "Kian," Nina whispered, leaning slightly into his touch. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been building for months, pushed to the surface by crisis and confession. "I need you to know something," Kian said, his voice low and intent. "Before all this, before I found out about Sophia, I was already—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I was already feeling things I didn't expect to feel, for you. Not just gratitude for carrying Amara, but something deeper." Nina's eyes widened. "I thought it was just me," she admitted. "I tried so hard to maintain professional boundaries, to remember my role. But somewhere along the way, everything changed." Kian finished for her. "Yes." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their mutual confession settling around them. Nina was the first to speak again. "Where do we go from here?" she asked. "The contract, the arrangement, it's all designed with separation in mind. You become Amara's father. I step away." Kian shook his head slowly. "I don't know exactly. I just know that the idea of you walking out of our lives after Amara is born feels wrong now." "For me too," Nina whispered. With gentle deliberation, Kian drew her into his arms. Nina came willingly, her head resting against his chest, his hand cradling the back of her neck. Between them, Amara kicked energetically, as if sensing the emotional breakthrough happening around her. They both laughed softly at the timing. "Someone has opinions," Kian murmured. "She always does," Nina replied, her voice warm with affection. They remained entwined on the couch, talking softly as night deepened around them. Nina shared more about Sophia, the 26 hours of labor, the weight of her tiny body, the smell of her skin that Nina had tried desperately to memorize, knowing their time was limited. Kian listened attentively, offering comfort when emotions overwhelmed her, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than judgment. In turn, Kian revealed his own fears about fatherhood, his worries that he would repeat his own father's emotional distance, his concerns about balancing work with Amara's needs, his secret terror that he might somehow fail the daughter he already loved beyond measure. "You won't," Nina assured him, her faith in him evident. "I've seen how you prepare for her, how you research everything, how you talk to her, how you've reorganized your entire life around her arrival. You're already an amazing father, Kian." Her words touched him deeply. "Thank you for saying that." As dawn light began filtering through Nina's curtains, they realized they had talked through the entire night. They had an ultrasound appointment in just a few hours, but neither felt the exhaustion that should have accompanied a sleepless night. Instead, there was a sense of lightness between them, as if the truth, painful as it had been, had cleared away barriers they hadn't even recognized. "We should try to rest a bit before the appointment," Nina suggested reluctantly, not wanting their connection to end. Kian nodded, rising from the couch. "I'll pick you up at 9:30. "Yes." He gathered his coat and the now empty folder he had brought, the evidence no longer necessary, the facts incorporated into his understanding of the remarkable woman before him. At the door, he turned back. Nina stood in the center of her living room, backlit by morning sun, her pregnancy now prominently displayed in her profile. She had never looked more beautiful to him. "Nina," he said softly, "thank you for trusting me with your truth." She smiled through remnants of tears. "Thank you for being worthy of it." Kian crossed the room in 3 strides, acting on impulse rather than calculation for once in his carefully controlled life. Cupping Nina's face in his hands, he hesitated just long enough to see the welcome in her eyes before lowering his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, an affirmation rather than a passion. Nina's hands came to rest on his chest, neither pushing away nor pulling closer, simply connecting. When they separated, both were smiling. "I'll see you soon," Kian promised. As he drove home in the early morning light, Kian felt a profound shift in his understanding of what family could mean. He had begun this journey seeking a child, imagining himself as a single father, creating a controlled, nurturing environment. Now he found himself considering possibilities that included Nina beyond, her role as surrogate, as a presence in Amara's life, in his life. The future remained uncertain. There would be practical considerations, legal complications, emotional adjustments. The path forward wouldn't be simple or straightforward, but for the first time since discovering Nina's secret, Kian felt hopeful rather than betrayed. They had weathered their first real crisis together and emerged stronger, more connected, more honest with each other. Back in her apartment, Nina gently placed Sophia's box back in its place of honor on her dresser. For years, looking at it had brought primarily pain and regret. Today, though still bittersweet, it also represented something new, the truth she had finally shared, the acceptance she had found in Kian's eyes, the possibility of a future where her past was integrated rather than hidden. She placed a protective hand over Amara, feeling the now familiar movements within. "Your father is an extraordinary man," she whispered, "and I think we might have found something neither of us was looking for." The next few weeks would bring more conversations, more adjustments, more decisions about how to move forward together. Their journey had only begun, but the real test was yet to come, because love isn't proven in words but in actions. Sometimes the family you create is stronger than the one you're born into. Morning sunlight filtered through the nursery curtains, casting golden patterns across the freshly painted walls. Kian stood in the doorway, watching Nina arrange stuffed animals in the crib. 2 months had passed since the night of revelations. 2 months of careful rebuilding, of honest conversations, of redefined boundaries and new possibilities. "What do you think?" Nina asked, stepping back to assess her work. "Is it too much?" Kian smiled, moving to stand beside her. "It's perfect." The nursery had transformed from a concept into a reality. Pale yellow walls with forest details, a rocking chair beside the window, bookshelves filled with carefully selected stories. Everything was ready for Amara's arrival, now just weeks away. "I was thinking," Kian said, his voice careful but determined, "about what happens after." Nina tensed slightly. Despite their growing closeness, despite the kiss they had shared and the many that, had followed, they had been cautious about defining the future beyond Amara's birth. "What about it?" she asked. Kian took her hand, leading her to the rocking chair. She sat while he knelt before her, a position that had become familiar as her pregnancy advanced and movement grew more difficult. "I want you in our lives," he said simply, "not just as Amara's surrogate, not just as a friend who visits occasionally. I want you there for her first steps, her first words, her first day of school." Nina's eyes filled with tears. "Kian, I know it's complicated," he continued, "legally, emotionally, practically. But I've never been more certain of anything. These past months with you have shown me what family really means. Not just shared DNA, but shared purpose, shared joy, shared challenges." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Nina's breath caught. "This isn't a proposal," Kian clarified quickly. "Not yet. That would be too much, too soon. But it is a promise." He opened the box, revealing a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a tree, branches extending outward from a solid trunk. "A family tree," Nina whispered, recognizing the symbolism immediately. "Our family tree," Kian corrected gently, "still growing, still defining itself, but rooted in something real." As he fastened the necklace around her neck, Nina felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for years, the certainty that her past, present, and future could exist in harmony. "I want that too," she admitted, "to be part of her life, part of yours. But there's so much we haven't figured out." "We'll figure it out together," Kian promised. One day at a time, they sealed the promise with a kiss, Amara kicking energetically between them, as if offering her own approval. The call came at 3:17 in the morning, 2 weeks before Nina's due date. "Kian?" Her voice was breathless, edged with tension. "My water broke. The contractions are already 5 minutes apart." Kian was instantly alert, adrenaline clearing the fog of sleep. "I'm on my way. Don't move, don't panic. Everything's going to be fine." He made it to her apartment in record time, breaking at least 3 traffic laws in the process. Nina met him at the door, hospital bag already packed, face pale but composed. "Ready?" he asked, steadying her with a hand at her elbow. She nodded, then grimaced as another contraction gripped her. "She's impatient." Like her father, Kian laughed despite his nervousness. "And stubborn. Like her surrogate." The drive to the hospital passed in a blur of contractions and reassurances. By the time they reached the maternity ward, Nina was progressing rapidly. "First babies aren't supposed to come this quickly," the nurse commented as she checked Nina's dilation. "She doesn't like to follow rules." Nina managed through gritted teeth. Another family trait. 6 hours later, as dawnlight brightened the hospital room, Nina's exhausted voice mingled with a newborn's indignant cry. The doctor placed a squirming, red-faced Amara on Nina's chest, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. The pain, the complexity of their situation, the uncertainty of the future. "She's here," Nina whispered, tears streaming down her face. "She's perfect." Kian leaned close, one arm around Nina's shoulders, the other gently touching Amara's tiny hand. "You're both perfect," he said, voice thick with emotion. The medical staff moved efficiently around them, completing necessary procedures, but allowed these precious first moments of bonding uninterrupted. Despite the clear legal agreements, Kian was Amara's father. Nina the surrogate. No one attempted to separate them or reinforce boundaries. Something about the tableau they created together suggested a unity that transcended contractual definitions. Later, in a private recovery room, Kian sat beside Nina's bed, cradling Amara in his arms. The newborn gazed up at him with unfocused dark eyes, her tiny features a blend of his genetics and something uniquely her own. "I never knew it was possible to love someone this much this instantly," he admitted, awestruck. Nina watched them together, her heart full. "That's the miracle of it." A nurse entered with discharge paperwork, explaining the process for Kian to take Amara home the following day. The moment brought reality crashing back. According to their contract, Nina's official role ended with delivery. She would return to her apartment alone, while Kian and Amara began their life as a family unit. After the nurse left, silence filled the room. Kian looked at Nina, reading the conflict in her expression. "This feels wrong," he said finally. "It's what we agreed to," Nina reminded him, though her voice lacked conviction. "Plans change. People change." Kian shifted Amara to one arm, using his free hand to take Nina's. "Come home with us." Nina's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to do this without you. Not for Amara's first night, not for any night after that." His voice grew more certain with each word. "Move in with us, Nina. Not as our surrogate, but as part of our family. We'll figure out the details later. Legal arrangements, permanent living situations, everything else. But right now, Amara needs both of us." Nina looked from Kian to the sleeping newborn, overcome with longing and hesitation. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Kian replied. "Except maybe that I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Nina felt tears spring to her eyes again. "I'm already there," she whispered. "I've been falling for months." When they left the hospital the next day, they left together. Kian carrying, Amara in her car seat, Nina walking beside him, their fingers intertwined. They drove not to Nina's apartment to collect her things, but directly to Kian's penthouse, which had already begun transforming from a sleek bachelor pad into a warm family home. The first months with Amara created a new rhythm to their lives. Nighttime feedings blurred into dawn diaper changes, which melted into afternoon naps and evening baths. Kian rearranged his work schedule, conducting meetings from home when possible, bringing Amara to the office in a carrier when necessary. His employees quickly adapted to seeing their formidable CEO cuddling an infant during video conferences or gently bouncing a fussy baby while reviewing quarterly projections. Nina converted one corner of Kian's home office into a studio space, returning to her art between caring for Amara. Her paintings evolved, incorporating motifs of growth, connection, and new beginnings. A gallery in San Francisco featured her work in a show titled Rebirth, and to Nina's surprise, every piece sold on opening night. "You've found your voice," her former art professor told her, studying a particularly moving canvas depicting a mother and child silhouetted against a rising sun. "There's an authenticity in these that wasn't present before." Nina smiled, glancing across the gallery where Kian stood proudly showing Amara the paintings. "I found more than my voice," she replied. "I found my place." As Amara grew from newborn to infant to curious baby, Kian and Nina's relationship deepened alongside their parenting partnership. They moved through the world increasingly as a unit, their individual strengths complementing each other, their shared focus on Amara binding them together. One balmy evening, as they walked along the shores of Lake Merritt with 6-month-old Amara strapped to Kian's chest, he stopped beneath a flowering willow tree. "Do you remember our conversation in the nursery before Amara was born?" he asked. "When I gave you the necklace?" Nina touched the silver tree pendant that rarely left her neck. "Of course. I said it wasn't a proposal yet." Kian reached for her hand. "I'd like to amend that statement." Nina's breath caught as Kian carefully shifted Amara to one arm, then lowered himself to one knee on the grassy shore. "Nina Bosco," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "You came into my life as a surrogate and became so much more. My partner, my best friend, the love I never expected to find. Will you marry me? Not just for Amara's sake, but for ours." Tears blurred Nina's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes." Amara chose that moment to let out a delighted squeal, tiny hands reaching toward Nina. The three embraced beside the lake, their laughter and tears mingling as passers-by smiled at the obvious joy radiating from the newly engaged family. They married 3 months later in the same spot, under the willow tree now laden with twinkling lights. The ceremony was small but meaningful. Dante served as best man, Mila as maid of honor, and Nina's mother held Amara, now dressed in a tiny flower girl dress that matched her mother's simple white gown. I never expected this path, Kian said in his vows, voice carrying across the quiet gathering. I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. A child, a controlled environment, a life I designed myself. Instead, I found you, and you showed me that the best families aren't designed, they're discovered. Nina's vows honored both past and present. 10 years ago, I made the hardest choice of my life, giving up a child I couldn't care for. That choice led me here, to you, to Amara, to a family built on truth and compassion rather than obligation. You saw my broken places and loved me not despite them, but because of how they shaped me. As they exchanged rings, Amara reached up from Nina's mother's arms, babbling her own contribution to the ceremony. Everyone laughed, the moment perfectly capturing the blend of formality and family chaos that would characterize their life together. The years that followed brought both joys and challenges. Legal processes to establish Nina as Amara's adoptive mother alongside Kian's biological parenthood, balancing careers with family time. The occasional raised eyebrow at their unconventional origin story. Yet through it all, they maintained the honesty that had saved them during their first crisis. When Amara was old enough to understand, they began sharing age-appropriate versions of how their family came to be, not as a secret to be revealed later, but as an ongoing conversation about different ways families form. "So Mummy carried me in her tummy for you, Daddy?" 4-year-old Amara asked one evening during bedtime stories. "That's right," Kian confirmed, and then we all fell in love with each other and became a family. Amara considered this with the seriousness only a 4-year-old can muster. "That's a good way to make a family," she decided finally. Nina and Kian exchanged smiles over her head. "We think so too," Nina agreed. Their story began attracting attention beyond their immediate circle. A local newspaper featured them in an article about modern families. A parenting magazine interviewed them about their journey. Kian was invited to speak at a conference on ethical surrogacy practices where he emphasized the importance of psychological support and open communication throughout the process. Nina's art continued evolving, with a series focused on transformative relationships gaining national recognition. One piece in particular, a large-scale painting showing 2 distinct trees whose branches gradually intertwined to form a protective canopy over a sapling, became the cover image for a book about chosen families. "Your work resonates with so many people," a gallery representative explained. "You're capturing something universal about how connections form and transform us." But perhaps their greatest impact came through the surrogacy support group they established together. Drawing on their own experience, they created a space where surrogates and intended parents could discuss the emotional complexities often overlooked in the clinical process. Nina worked particularly with women who had previously placed children for adoption, helping them navigate the unique challenges of surrogacy after such experiences. "Your story gave me hope," one young woman told Nina after a group session. "I thought my past made me damaged somehow, unworthy of helping create a family. You showed me it might actually make me more compassionate, more prepared." 5 years after Amara's birth, Kian, Nina, and their daughter stood on the balcony of their new home, a spacious house, with a garden overlooking the bay, halfway between Oakland and San Francisco, to accommodate both their careers. "Look, Mama," Amara called, pointing excitedly as a small sailboat glided across the water. "Like in your painting." Nina smiled, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. At 5, Amara had Kian's analytical mind and Nina's artistic eye, a combination that made her both thoughtful and expressive. Her dark hair fell in waves similar to Nina's, while her determined chin and focused gaze mirrored Kian's. "That's right, sweetie," Nina confirmed. "Good observation." Kian joined them, carrying a tray with 3 cups of hot chocolate. "Careful, it's hot," he warned, helping Amara wrap her small hands around her mug. As they sipped their drinks in comfortable silence, Nina reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a clinical arrangement between strangers to this, a family bonded by choice, rather than obligation, strengthened by challenges rather than weakened by them. "What are you thinking about?" Kian asked softly, noting her contemplative expression. "How lucky we are," she replied. "Not just to have found each other, but to have found the courage to be honest with each other, to build something real from a beginning that could have gone so differently. Kian nodded, understanding as he always did. Our greatest strength was never the contract or the arrangements, he said. It was our willingness to see beyond them, to recognize the family we could become. Amara looked between her parents, absorbing their words with typical attentiveness. "Can I tell you my favorite part of our story?" she asked. "Of course," Nina encouraged. "I like that you both chose each other," Amara said simply. "Even when it was hard. Even when you were scared." Kian and Nina exchanged glances over their daughter's head, both recognizing the wisdom in her observation. Their story had indeed been one of choices. Difficult ones, brave ones, transformative ones. "That's my favorite part too," Kian agreed, pulling both Nina and Amara into an embrace, as the sun began setting over the bay, painting the sky in brilliant golds and pinks. Their journey had begun with a business arrangement and a hidden past. It had transformed through honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to envision a different future than either had planned. And in that transformation, they had created something remarkable, a family, defined not by convention or contract, but by love that rewrote destiny. When we began this journey together, I asked you a question. What would you do if you discovered the person you trusted most had been hiding something that could change everything? Would you walk away? Or would you stay and fight for what you'd built together? Kian faced that exact moment of truth. He could have retreated behind legal contracts and justified anger. He could have protected himself from further emotional risk. Many would have. Instead, he chose to listen, to understand, to see Nina not just as someone who had deceived him, but as someone who carried deep wounds that shaped her choices. In that moment of compassion, everything changed. Not just for Nina and Kian, but for little Amara, who would grow up in a home built on forgiveness rather than resentment. Their story reminds us that redemption is always possible. Nina carried the weight of her past decision for a decade, believing it disqualified her from happiness. Yet that very pain gave her the capacity for extraordinary empathy. Our mistakes and regrets, when faced honestly, can become the foundation for our greatest strengths. We witnessed how vulnerability, genuine, unguarded openness, created the deepest connection between them. Their journey teaches us that love must be earned through trust, not simply claimed or expected. Each small moment of reliability between them, Kian showing up for every appointment, Nina pouring her artistic heart into creating Amara's nursery, built a foundation strong enough to withstand crisis when it came. Perhaps most powerfully, we saw how honesty ultimately heals while secrets wound. The very truth Nina feared would destroy their relationship became the catalyst that transformed it into something deeper. The pain of revelation was real but temporary. The damage of continued deception would have been lasting. Nina and Kian's story affirms that our past doesn't define our future unless we allow it to. Nina's earlier choice to place her first daughter for adoption could have remained a source of perpetual shame. Instead, it became integrated into the compassionate woman and mother she grew to be. And finally, we witnessed how true love sees beyond labels. Kian didn't fall in love with the surrogate, and Nina didn't fall in love with the billionaire. They saw each other as complete human beings, flawed, complex, and worthy of acceptance precisely because of those complexities. I share these stories because I believe they matter. In a world that often seems divided by judgment and quick condemnation, tales of second chances remind us of our common humanity. They invite us to consider where in our own lives we might offer forgiveness, or where we might need to summon the courage to be truthful about our own hidden parts. Have you ever given someone a second chance that transformed both your lives, or received one when you desperately needed it? Your stories matter too. Share them in the comments below. You never know who might find hope in your experience. Thank you for spending this time with me today. When you watch these stories, comment and share your own experiences, I feel truly heard, and that means everything to me. This connection we share through these stories is what drives me to continue. I genuinely love each and every one of you. Watch out for our next remarkable journey. You won't want to miss it. Click subscribe and hit the notification bell. Each subscription enables me to continue sharing even more powerful stories. Until next time, remember that the most beautiful chapters of your story might still be waiting to be written.